What is your why? Every member of the fraternity needs to have a why as to why they became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. For me, this is my why. When I was in high school, my church in New Jersey, where I'm from, they put on an annual event for all the seniors, and it was a luncheon. So I was at the head table at the year I graduated, and we had a keynote speaker, and I didn't know who the guy was. I didn't really take much of what he said that day. He spoke very slow, and it was relatively boring in my opinion. But after the event was over, my parents were very excited to meet this man. So we go to meet the man, and he asked me, where was I going to college? I said Howard University. He became very excited because he said, oh, my grandson is also going to Howard this year. You should come to the house and meet my grandson. Now, I don't want to meet his grandson. I was kind of bored that day. I wanted to go hang with my friends. But my parents were extremely excited that we had been invited to this man's home. He lived in Teaneck, New Jersey. I'm from East Orange, which is about 20 minutes away. So they set it up, and we go to his house. We get to his house that evening. We rung the doorbell. His wife answers the door. She leads us into the living room and says he'll be right down. So as we walk into the house, I notice pictures on his walls. He has a picture of himself with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There's a picture of himself with Malcolm X. There's a picture of himself with all the Jackson 5 members. Picture of himself with Berry Gordy. I saw President Reagan. I saw President Carter. I saw Jackie Robinson. So now I'm like, who is this guy? So he comes down, he welcomes us, and he tells us all these stories about the places he's been, all over the world, people he's met. This man's name was Mal Good. Mal Good was the first African American to break into the world of journalism. So we had a great evening of conversation. He gives me his phone number and says, if you ever need anything, call me. Now, back then we didn't have cell phones, so he literally gave me his home number. I take his number, I thank the gentleman, I go away to college. I get to college at Howard. I don't know much about fraternities and sororities at all. But in the spring, I saw a line pledging. Didn't know what it was. I asked my roommate, hey, what is that over there? All the guys were lined up. They were bald-headed and marching down the yard or whatever. And one guy was in class with me. He would come in class every day, dressed the exact same way he was yesterday, sit down and fall asleep, and cutting corners when he walked. So I asked my roommate. He said, those guys are pledging Alpha. They're called Sphinxmen. And I said, well, what is that about? He said, well, I don't know much about it, but maybe the library might. So I decided to go to the library. I'm a researcher. Didn't know that the Howard University Library is an archive. They've got everything in there. So when I go in there and look up Alpha Phi Alpha, I find the Sphinx magazine, which is the publication for the fraternity. I begin reading every single Sphinx magazine they had from the very early days of the founding of the fraternity up until, current day. I get to 1986, and I see on the cover of one of the months in 86 was the guy from my luncheon that spoke when I was a senior in high school. I said, oh my God, this is Mr. Mal Good. So I literally run down the hill to my dorm. I stayed in Lucy Diggs Slow Hall, which is one of the AKA founders, named after her. I go to my room, I'm throwing clothes out the drawer looking for this man's number. I find his number and I give him a call. And he answered the phone. And I said, Mr. Good, you might not remember me, but I went to Howard with your grandson. He said, oh yeah, from the church in New Jersey. Okay, how you doing? I said, I'm doing great, sir. Listen, I was looking at this Sphinx magazine, and I see you're on the cover of one of the issues. Are you a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated? He said, am I a member? And he began to pour into me all about Alpha. He told me what Dr. King was really like. He told me he sang the hymn with all 7 founders. He told me when Dr. King went to give the I Have a Dream speech, most of the hands he shook walking to the podium were Alpha brothers. They said when he got to the podium, someone whispered in his ear and told him that Brother W.E.B. Du Bois had just passed away in Ghana, right as he was getting ready to give that speech. He poured into me so much about the fraternity and what the ideals were, what we stand for, what we're about with service to the community and brotherhood, that I said, wow, I want to be a member. And he said, well, if you pursue the fraternity, call me and let me know. And when I made a decision to go after the fraternity, I called him, and he basically would walk me through certain things. And when the brothers gave us an assignment, they said, do a report about our famous Alpha. I did one about him, about Mr. Mal Good. And so Mal Good was the first African American to break into journalism. He got his career started because Jackie Robinson, who was the first Major League Baseball player, African American, to break into the major leagues, said that I refused to get interviewed if there's not at least one African American or Negro journalist in the room. So CBS was almost forced to hire someone to bring them in to interview Jackie Robinson. They brought in Mal Good. If you're not familiar with who Mal Good is, in the Spike Lee movie, he did the Malcolm X movie where Denzel played Malcolm. At the very end of the film, you see actual images of Malcolm. And the voiceover you're hearing is Ossie Davis doing Malcolm's eulogy. Where there's a part where Mr. Davis says, "Have you ever had Malcolm smile at you?" When you hear that part, Malcolm is sitting on the couch and he's laughing with another gentleman. That's Mal Good. So Mal Good inspired me. He made me want to become an alpha, and he made me want to not only become an alpha, but to then pour into other alphas who were coming up behind me. So I tried my best to teach. I tried my best to pour into and to mentor because that man poured into me. Rest in peace, Mr. Mal Good. Brothers like Stuart Scott, rest in peace, used to always credit Mr. Good and said if it wasn't for Mal Good, I don't know where I'd be. So journalists like Jamel Hill, like Robin Roberts, like Stuart Scott passed away, like Stan Verrett, who was my profile at ESPN. Those gentlemen got their start, Stephen A. Smith, because of men like Mal Good. So that's my why Mr. Mal Good was a great member of Alpha Phi Alpha. He encouraged me to encourage others. That's my why. What is yours?